Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. Let's talk about custom connectors in PowerApps, PowerAutomate and Logic App. While Logic App, PowerAutomate and PowerApps offers over 750 connectors to connect to the Microsoft verified services. We already have out of the box 750 connectors in those apps. But if you want to communicate with services that are available with the out of the box connectors, I mean the pre-built connectors, then we need to use these custom connectors as an option or a scenario to connect with other services, to connect triggers or actions. I mean, to create triggers or actions via custom connectors to communicate with other services, other REST services or SOAP APIs, etc. In this video series, we'll be talking about the life cycle of creating the custom connectors. What are the ways to create custom connectors? How do we manage the custom connectors? And how we use these custom connectors in the Power Apps and Logic Apps. What are the authentication available in the custom connectors and what are the best practices? Let's talk about that in this series. So for the intro part 1 video, we'll be discussing about the life cycle of the custom connectors and what are the ways we can create the custom connectors. Right? Let's dive in. These are the life cycle of the custom connectors. So while creating the custom connectors, we need to define what is the API that we need to use for the communication purpose. Whether it is a REST API or SOAP API or a public API or private API, we need to define what is the API, what is the request type, what is the request header, what kind of request verb it is, whether it is a HTTP, GET, POST, patch, delete, etc. and what kind of authentication the connector or the API will be using. All these details we need to describe, right? So first step in the custom connector is building and securing our API, right? We need to define the API. Like public API, we'll be using the Azure function. Consider if you are using the public API, I mean via the internet, if you want your service to communicate via internet, then consider the following services like Microsoft services like Azure Functions, Web Apps, or API apps. Or if you want your custom connector to communicate via your own network on premise, then consider using data connectivity through on-premise data gateway. Like your on-premise network might be having the own app like ASP.NET web app or a web API that has been already been running in the on-premise. If you want your connector to be communicate with that on-premise API, then consider the private API by selecting this on-premise API option, right? And securing our API, like we have 4 standard authentication methods for creating the custom connectors. First is generic OAuth 2.0 and then OAuth 2.0 for specific services like including the Azure AD, Dropbox, GitHub, Salesforce, and then Instagram, Google, etc. And then next type is basic authentication where we'll be specifying the username and password. And then finally we have the API key. So the generic method what we will be following in this tutorial is we'll be creating the Azure AD app. And an authentication for the demo today will be using OAuth 2.0. So once we define our API and specify the authentication method, next is we'll be describing and defining our API methods. So we'll be following all the approaches. Like we have 3 approaches. Like we can define and describe our API from the scratch in the Azure portal, or we can create a Postman collection, or we can create an Open API Swagger file, formerly a Swagger file. So that's now called as Open API file. We can define the Open API definitions like the JSON file and describe all the properties over there. So basically that file will have the API details. What is the HTTP verb, or what is the how many APIs will be calling, and what is if there is a post method, what will be the body, or if it is a get method, what will be the content type, and what will be the query parameters, and what will be the format of the responses. All these details will be describing in this section. So once all these sections are done, we'll be testing our app. So once the testing is done, we'll be using that app in a PowerApps, PowerAutomate, or Logic Apps. Optionally, we can share the custom connector to the other users or to the entire tenant, or we can also certify the custom connectors, right? So if you want to share the connectors with all the users of Logic App or Automate or Power Apps, we need to submit the connector for Microsoft certification, right? Microsoft will review our connector and check for technical and content compliance and validate the functionality, right? So optionally, we can do that if you want this connector to be available across the Microsoft tenants. Then you need to certify your connector to be available for all the users. So far, we have talked about the high-level overview of custom connectors. What are the lifecycle that are available in the custom connectors for building, securing, and defining the APIs for communicating with the other services. In the next part of the video, we'll be talking about the ways to create the custom connectors. Right? See you in the next video. Thank you.